When the lion wakes, the entire savanna holds its breath. But what if that lion wasn't a beast in the wild? What if it was a forgotten country, dismissed as poor, landlocked, and irrelevant? That's exactly what happened when Burkina Faso, under the command of a young military captain named Ibrahim Traoré, stood up, not with a roar of violence, but with a roar of defiance. For decades, this small West African nation was known more for instability than strength. Foreign companies drained its gold, international powers dictated its politics, and its people were told to be grateful for crumbs, while billions in mineral wealth flowed to Toronto, Paris, and London. But in 2024, something ancient stirred. Without a single shot fired, 5 massive gold mines once controlled by Canadian corporations were taken back by the state. Not abandoned, not nationalized on paper, taken physically, operationally, decisively. Burkina Faso didn't wait for permission. It rewrote the rules. A new state-owned mining company, SOPOM, was launched, fully operational from day one, not just managing assets, but extracting, refining, exporting. And here's the part that left foreign investors stunned. They weren't offered buyouts. They weren't given soft landings. They were told to leave. And they did. Traoré didn't stop there. He banned second-hand clothes, created a national bank, opened the country's first gold refinery, and replaced foreign-controlled infrastructure with indigenous innovation. The headlines never screamed, but the ground shifted. Africa had seen coups before. It had seen uprisings. But what Burkina Faso sparked was different. It was surgical, strategic, and systemic. Not just about power, about value, about control, and most dangerously for the old world, about example. Now the question stands, if one small nation, dismissed by diplomats and investors alike, can rise and reclaim its gold, its land, its voice, what happens when others follow? And more urgently, who will dare try to put the lion back to sleep? Stay with us. This is not just the story of Ibrahim Traoré or Burkina Faso. This is the story of Africa's awakening and the storm it is about to unleash. The Great Resource Takeover. Buried beneath Burkina Faso's red earth lies one of Africa's most coveted treasures, gold. For decades, it was not the Burkinabe people who reaped its rewards. It was foreign shareholders, primarily from Canada, who saw the glimmer of profit where locals only saw poverty. That changed in 2024. In a move that stunned the global mining industry, the government of Burkina Faso, under Captain Ibrahim Traoré, announced the full state takeover of 5 major gold mining operations. These weren't dormant sites. These were high-yield, fully operational mines producing hundreds of thousands of ounces of gold annually, some run by foreign companies for more than a decade. With quiet precision and relentless will, Traoré's administration took them back. There was no press conference, no long-winded diplomatic negotiation, just action. The legal foundation had been laid months earlier. In August 2024, Burkina Faso revised its national mining code. A 10% minimum state stake in all new mining operations became law. But the real surprise was buried deeper. The state now reserved the right to claim up to 70% ownership in strategic projects. Strategic didn't mean theoretical. It meant gold. One by one, Canadian firms began to feel the squeeze. Environmental audits, contract reviews, license delays, increased taxation. The writing was on the wall, and it was in bold Burkinabe. By December, those firms began packing. Some left silently. Others issued vague press releases blaming security concerns or shifting regulatory environments. But the truth was simpler. They had lost control. Then came the birth of SOPAMEB, the Société de Patrimoine Minier du Burkina. Unlike past African national mining companies that were symbolic and poorly managed, SOPAMEB was built to operate. It inherited not just machinery and mines, but experienced local engineers, geologists, and logistics professionals, people who had always been there, working under foreign flags, now answering to their own. Within months, SOPAMEB was pulling gold from the same veins once controlled by Toronto boardrooms. In the first quarter of 2025 alone, over 11 tons of gold were extracted by state entities, worth nearly $780 million at global prices. Money that once funded luxury towers in Canada was now paying for roads, clinics, and classrooms in Burkina Faso. But Traoré's strategy didn't stop at extraction. He demanded value addition. Instead of exporting raw gold to Europe or the Middle East, Burkina Faso began construction on its first domestic refinery, aiming to process 150 tons annually. A national gold reserve followed, and soon, the idea of a regional refining and storage hub shared with Mali and Niger entered serious discussions. This wasn't nationalism, it was architecture, a new economic architecture rooted in control, dignity, and sovereignty. Foreign investors were stunned. Why didn't Burkina Faso offer buyouts? Why weren't there arbitration deals or golden parachutes for departing firms? Because this wasn't a business transaction. This was a divorce from dependency. And it was personal. Traoré asked the kind of questions that polite diplomats don't. How can a nation with billions in buried gold still beg for foreign aid? Why do Toronto pension funds grow fat while Burkinabe children sit in underfunded schools? And most importantly, who truly owns the ground beneath a nation's feet? With each passing month, the country's economic map was redrawn, not by foreign consultants, but by local hands. And the message to the world was unmistakable. If you want to do business here, you don't call the shots. We do. But now, the world watches closely. Can a state-run mining company truly succeed in a market dominated by multinationals? Can Burkina Faso maintain production, efficiency, and transparency while under immense external pressure? And perhaps the most important question of all, if this model spreads across Africa, who stands to lose the most? Let us know in the comments below. Do you believe more African nations should follow Burkina Faso's example? Would you trust a government-owned mining company over foreign investors? Or is this just a spark waiting to burn out? Your voice, like this story, matters more than ever. Resistance and reactions. They expected anger, maybe sanctions, maybe noise. What they did not expect was silence. When Burkina Faso nationalized its gold sector and sent foreign corporations packing, Canada didn't fight back. No lawsuits, no international arbitration, just carefully worded press releases and quiet withdrawals. Because deep down, they knew the truth. Burkina Faso wasn't negotiating anymore. It was commanding. But silence is rarely peace. Beneath the still surface, storms began to swirl. Western banks quietly froze millions in foreign reserves. Development loans stalled. International media began crafting a new narrative. Burkina Faso slips into economic chaos. They said, unstable, isolated, dangerous. Then came the think tanks. One after another, Western analysts warned of a power vacuum in the Sahel, of populist nationalism. Their real fear wasn't instability. Their fear was success. If a small, poor nation could take back its resources, cut off colonial-era deals, and still function, what excuse would others have for staying dependent? So the pushback began. A disinformation campaign swept across social media. claims that Sopameb was corrupt, that gold production had collapsed, that Traoré was hiding billions offshore. No evidence, just repetition. Then came whispers of sabotage, equipment mysteriously failing, export contracts being canceled by foreign shipping agents, embassies issuing safety advisories for business travel to Burkina Faso. It was clear if they couldn't stop the revolution from outside, they would rot it from within. But Traoré had studied this playbook before. He responded not with more noise, but with discipline. Instead of blaming the West, he turned inward. He expanded domestic surveillance, not to target dissidents, but to protect national systems from digital sabotage. He ordered full audits of mining operations. He nationalized foreign-owned telecommunications infrastructure. Every cable, every router, every data stream now passed through Burkinabe hands. At the same time, his government doubled down on popular support. State-owned projects were accelerated. Within months, Burkina Faso unveiled its first fully local cashew and tomato processing plants, employing thousands. A national textile program replaced imported second-hand clothing with traditional Faso Danfani fabric, creating a fashion revolution tied directly to national pride. Hospitals were renovated. Rural clinics received mobile care units. A new university opened, teaching mining, engineering, and public finance, not in French, but in Moray and Dioula, Burkina's own languages. These weren't photo ops. These were foundations. But the most dangerous challenge was yet to come, from within the ranks. In late 2024, a small group of military officers staged an attempted coup. It lasted just 2 hours. The conspirators were arrested. Their communications traced back to encrypted channels linked to foreign servers. The plot failed. But the message was clear. The battle wasn't just for gold. It was for the soul of the country. Instead of purging the army or silencing critics, Traoré gave a national address. We were not attacked with bullets. We were attacked with doubt. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't promise revenge. He asked the nation to stay awake because the lion had finally opened its eyes. Burkina Faso's people responded in force. Mass rallies erupted, not against the West, but for themselves. In Ouagadougou, children carried signs that read, "Our gold, our future." In Bobo Dioulasso, market vendors began accepting state-backed Afro money as a statement of defiance. Across the region, neighbors began to stir. Mali, Niger, and Guinea took notice. One by one, they entered discussions about joint refining, shared banking systems, regional gold reserves, and borderless trade. The Sahel was no longer a zone of conflict. It was becoming a zone of clarity. But can this fragile fire survive the cold winds of global retaliation? Or will the next attack come not from drones or sanctions, but from familiar faces in darkened corridors? Let us know in the comments below. Do you believe this revolution can survive the storm within? Or is the true danger not foreign armies, but foreign ideas still living in African minds? A new society built on ashes. When you burn the old map, you do not just redraw borders. You redefine what it means to be a nation, and that is exactly what unfolded in Burkina Faso in the wake of Traoré's economic revolution. As foreign companies fled and traditional allies stepped back, many expected collapse. They pictured ghost towns, idle factories, hungry citizens, and desperation. Instead, something else happened, something no one predicted. The people began to build. Traoré's government unleashed a wave of state-backed programs, not as handouts, but as launch pads. Factories that once sat empty were revived and repurposed. A cashew processing facility, once mothballed under World Bank conditions, reopened with full local ownership, projected to create over 20,000 jobs. In the western region, a tomato plant funded by public shares, small investments from farmers and diaspora, began producing 800 kilograms of paste per hour. Burkina Faso wasn't just surviving, it was reclaiming agency. Then came the cotton factories, no longer producing for export to Paris, but for domestic use. Traoré made a stunning cultural decree. All public schools would shift to traditional African uniforms using Faso Danfani fabric. Courtrooms soon followed, with judges trading colonial robes for indigenous dress. The symbolism wasn't lost. Burkina Faso was shedding the skin of dependency and dressing itself in identity. But not all consequences were symbolic. Across the nation, displaced communities were resettled into newly constructed social housing projects. Over 1,000 units were built in regions long neglected. Schools reopened in formerly insecure zones. Electricity, once limited to major cities, began reaching rural areas through solar grids. Access to drinking water rose by 14% in under a year. The health sector saw its own rebirth. Mobile clinics traveled to forgotten villages. Medical equipment once imported through NGO intermediaries was now purchased directly by the state. A new university hospital broke ground in Pala with partnerships from China, not Paris. Every step was local first. Every initiative, sovereignty forward. But the most transformative shift was silent in the minds of the youth. Instead of watching their country as victims of history, students were now writing new chapters. Over 20,000 young people enrolled in state-funded training programs in agriculture, engineering, and renewable energy. Each student was promised land, tools, and access to microfinance, a chance not to flee, but to build. This was not utopia. There were still power shortages, inflation, discontent. But this time, people were not waiting for rescue. They were part of the rebuilding itself. Politically, the shift was just as profound. The old political parties, once funded through foreign grants, began to crumble. In their place, community assemblies and local councils grew stronger, backed by public trust and new accountability measures. A new biometric ID system linked voting, banking, and healthcare, cutting fraud and strengthening citizen engagement. And yet, for all these transformations, the world remained skeptical. Western media headlines painted Traoré as a dictator, a populist, a reckless gambler. But inside the country, a different story was being told, not through press releases, but through tangible change. A mother in Dori holding her daughter's school book, stamped "Made in Burkina Faso." A farmer in Koudougou checking rainfall data via a locally developed app. A nurse in Bobo Dioulasso paid in Afro money for the first time. These are not propaganda victories. They are proof of life, proof that something different is being born. But now comes the hard part. Burkina Faso is no longer on its knees. But can it stay standing without being pushed into isolation, subversion, or even sabotage? Will the people's hope outlast the global pressure? And you, watching from afar, do you believe real sovereignty must always come with suffering? Or is Burkina Faso proving that sometimes freedom feeds, heals, and builds? When Washington blinks first, when the lion roars, even the eagle must pause mid-flight. In Washington, Burkina Faso's actions triggered not fury, but confusion. The U.S. State Department didn't issue immediate condemnations. There were no new sanctions. Instead, there were closed-door meetings, strategy memos, silence on Twitter. Why? Because this time, it wasn't about ideology. It was about influence and losing it. For decades, U.S. Policy in Africa followed a simple formula: support stability, promote democracy, and protect access to strategic minerals through partnership. But Traoré broke that model without warning. He didn't just challenge France. He challenged the entire Western operating system in Africa. And here's what scared policymakers the most. Burkina Faso didn't pivot to China. It didn't fly Russian flags at the gold mines. It stood alone, an African solution to African problems. That made it far more dangerous, because Washington can compete with Moscow. It can counter Beijing. But how do you contain a self-confident Africa that plays by its own rules? The Pentagon watched nervously as Burkina Faso forged the Sahel alliance with Mali and Niger. Intelligence briefings began warning of a new geo-economic bloc outside U.S. influence. Diplomats whispered that if Afro money succeeded as a regional digital currency, it could threaten the entire CFA franc system, a pillar of French Western financial leverage. Meanwhile, global mining corporations pushed for intervention, but found no legal ground. Traoré's nationalizations were airtight, legal, domestic, sovereign. And that terrified Wall Street more than any rebel group ever could. Suddenly, the U.S. found itself in a dilemma. If it condemned Traoré, it risked looking like a bully. If it stayed silent, it looked irrelevant. If it engaged, it had to respect a leader who refused to bow. So instead, it hedged. State-sponsored NGOs began offering civil society support. Think tanks issued papers on democratic resilience in West Africa. Ambassadors floated proposals for technical assistance in gold transparency. But underneath it all was one question echoing through every corridor of American foreign policy. Is this the start of a new African century? And if so, who writes the rules? Globally, the responses were equally divided. China watched with approval, but kept its distance. Russia praised Traoré in rhetoric, but offered little material support. France, humiliated, isolated, its ambassadors expelled, its influence, once vast in the Sahel, now reduced to whispers. Only one actor remained uncertain: the American public. News outlets in the U.S. barely mentioned Burkina Faso. When they did, it was with vague phrases like uncertain transition or populist strongman. But the deeper story never broke through. And maybe that's the most dangerous silence of all, because while Washington debates, while Paris mourns, and while think tanks spin, a new political consciousness is rising from the dust of Ouagadougou. And if you're watching this from Idaho, or Texas, or Ohio, you're not disconnected from this story. That gold, it ends up in your electronics, your investments, your retirement funds. So ask yourself, if the lion keeps walking forward and the eagle keeps circling overhead, who really controls the sky? The road ahead, walking barefoot on gold Burkina Faso, now stands at a crossroads, not paved with aid, not lined with applause, but raw, winding, real. It is a road without signs, where the next step might lead to a cliff or to a summit. The gold beneath their feet still glimmers, but now the people see it not as a curse, but a compass. And yet, compasses don't guarantee safety. They only show direction. In the months ahead, Burkina Faso will face tests far greater than nationalization or economic reform. Will the state resist the corruption that inevitably follows power? Can it deliver justice not just against foreign exploiters, but for its own citizens? Will it embrace pluralism or slide toward centralized control disguised as unity? These are not theoretical concerns. Already whispers of authoritarianism echo in Western reports. Traoré's power is growing, and the institutions around him remain fragile. Journalists tread carefully. Opposition leaders lie low. The line between visionary and strongman is always thinner than it seems. Yet, for now, the people still walk with him, because for the first